Inside a police station, 5 men brutally attack the police commissioner, furious that he had arrested a beautiful woman. After beating him down, they casually leave the station as if no one can stop them. But the moment they step outside, they notice something strange. The entire street is deserted, and even the nearby theater has been shut down. The group's leader quickly realizes that something is wrong and tries to head back into the police station, but one of the officers immediately locks the doors from inside. Within seconds, members of the Axe Gang appear from every direction, completely surrounding them. The men desperately try to call for help, but the gang's leader, Brother Sum, calmly tells them that nobody is coming to save them. The group leader panics and tries to run, but before he can escape, one of the gang members hurls an axe at him, cutting his leg clean away from his body. Brother Sum then walks over and finishes him off without hesitation. The woman, terrified, begs Sum to spare her life. Sum coldly tells her that he does not kill women, but a moment later he raises a shotgun and blasts her anyway. This scene makes it clear that the city has fallen into chaos. Because of social unrest, crime, and disorder, the gangs now move freely without any real fear of the police. Out of all the criminal groups ruling the streets, the Axe Gang is the one everyone fears the most. Far away from that violent world is Pigsty Alley, a poor residential colony filled with cramped homes and struggling tenants. The place is owned by a middle-aged landlord and landlady who squeeze the residents for rent while also taking food from them whenever they want. The landlord is shameless as well, often flirting with the women who live there. Most of the tenants are simple, hard-working people just trying to survive. One day, while one of the residents is taking a bath, the water suddenly cuts off. Annoyed, he calls out for the landlady and demands to know what happened. The landlady storms down the stairs in a rage and immediately begins shouting at him. She complains that the tenants never pay rent on time, so from now on, she will shut off the water 4 days every week. After that, she starts insulting the rest of the tenants one by one before smacking the man so hard that he falls to the ground. What the residents do not realize is that the landlord and landlady are not ordinary people. They are retired kung fu masters with incredible hidden abilities. When the landlady returns to her room, she catches her husband flirting with women and secretly spying on them. Furious, she beats him up and throws him straight out of the window. Later, Sing and Bone arrive at Pigsty Alley and walk into a small barber shop. Sing tells the barber to cut Bone's hair. After the haircut is finished, Sing suddenly turns threatening and asks why the barber made Bone's hair look so good. Bone, meanwhile, pretends to be the boss of the Axe Gang and shows off his axe tattoos to scare the barber. Sing then pulls the barber aside and demands money, warning him that refusing could anger the so-called gang boss. But the barber is not impressed. He refuses to pay and calmly says that Sing cannot kill him because there are thousands of ordinary people just like him. Before long, the residents of the colony gather around Sing and Bone. Sing remains confident and challenges them to fight him one at a time. First, he challenges a woman and even lets her hit him first, but her punch hurts him far more than he expected. Trying to recover his pride, Sing then challenges an old man, only to discover that the man has an unbelievably muscular body. He quickly changes his mind again and chooses a child instead, thinking this will be easier. But even the child turns out to have a fully muscular physique. By now, the barber has already called the landlady, and she arrives ready to deal with the troublemaker. The landlady starts beating Sing with her sandal while he tries to threaten her, claiming that he belongs to the Axe Gang and will call for reinforcements. To prove his point, he lights a firecracker and throws it over the alley wall. Unfortunately, it lands right on the vice-general of the real Axe Gang, who is passing by with other gang members. The gang immediately enters Pigsty Alley to investigate. Sing wastes no time and blames the landlady, saying she was the one who threw the firecracker. But before the vice-general can react, the landlady runs away and hides under her blanket like nothing happened. The vice-general then turns his attention toward the barber. Just as he is about to attack him, an invisible force suddenly punches him across the alley and sends him crashing into a garbage can. The gang members rush over to help him, and the injured vice-general orders them to call for backup immediately. Soon, the full strength of the Axe Gang arrives at Pigsty Alley. The entire colony is surrounded by sharply dressed gang members, and the terrified residents are taken hostage. One of the gang members pours petrol over 2 tenants while Brother Sum threatens everyone in the colony. He demands that the person who attacked his vice-general step forward. If no one confesses, He warns that he will burn the tenants along with the entire alley. Some then tosses a lighter toward one of the soaked residents, but before it can land, the colony's coolie intercepts it. The coolie reveals that he was the one who knocked the vice general away. Immediately, the Axe Gang charges at him from all sides. But instead of being overwhelmed, the coolie uses powerful kung fu skills to defend himself and counter almost every attack thrown at him. As the fight becomes more chaotic, the tailor also reveals that he is a hidden kung fu master and joins the battle, helping the coolie take down the gang members. Then the baker also steps forward, showing that he too possesses incredible martial arts ability. With his staff and sharp kung fu techniques, he fights with such strength and precision that he even manages to break the gang members' guns during the battle. Working together, the three hidden masters successfully drive Brother Sum and the rest of the Axe Gang out of Pigsty Alley. But later that same night, Sing and Bone are captured by the gang for pretending to be Axe Gang members and embarrassing their name. Furious over the damage they caused to his reputation, Brother Sum orders both of them to be executed. Just when Sing is about to be killed, he quietly uses his lockpicking skills to free himself from his restraints. He quickly unlocks Bone as well, saving both of their lives. Instead of running away, Sing pleads with Brother Sum to let them join the Axe Gang, claiming that becoming one of them has always been his greatest dream. Sum listens to him but gives him one condition. If Sing truly wants to be accepted into the gang, then he must prove himself by killing someone. Later that night, Sing and Bone sit together and talk about who they should target. Sing says that he wants to go after the landlady and everyone living in Pigsty Alley. Bone reminds him that he does not even know kung fu, so killing people like them is impossible. This leads Sing to open up about his past. When Sing was a child, he once met an old man selling kung fu manuals. The seller told him that he had the perfect face and body of a future kung fu master. Believing every word, young Sing bought a copy of the legendary Buddhist palm technique. He spent all the money he had saved for his future, money that could have helped him study to become a doctor or a lawyer. After buying the book, he studied it with complete dedication and practiced the moves every day. One day, he saw a young girl being bullied and decided to step in, believing that his training had finally made him powerful. But instead of becoming a hero, he was beaten badly and humiliated by the bullies. They mocked him for thinking he could ever become a real kung fu master, and to make the humiliation even worse, they urinated on him. Sing explains that this painful experience crushed his faith in goodness and pushed him toward the idea of becoming a ruthless killer. After sharing this story, Sing and Bone go to buy ice cream. But once they get it, they run off without paying. The shop owner, a girl named Fong, chases after them, but the two manage to jump onto a tram and escape while teasing her from a distance. The next day at Pigsty Alley, the landlady angrily scolds the three kung fu masters for hiding their abilities and for attracting the attention of the mob. Her scolding quickly turns into an argument with Rabbit-Tooth Jane and the other tenants, who all begin shouting back at her. Annoyed by the noise, the landlady suddenly lets out such a powerful scream that the glass nearby begins to crack. Instantly, everyone falls silent. At the same time, Sing and Bone arrive at the alley with plans to assassinate the landlady. They hide in a corner, and Sing attempts to throw a knife at her. But the blade bounces back and gets stuck in his own shoulder. Injured and panicking, he tells Bone to take over. Bone tries, but his aim is so terrible that his knife ends up hitting Sing in the other shoulder instead. With only one knife left, Bone moves closer to improve his chances. But even then, he messes it up completely. As he throws the weapon, the blade somehow stabs Sing again, while only the empty sheath manages to hit the landlady. After this disastrous attempt, the two try to flee, but the landlady spots them. Bone tries to scare her by holding up a large box, but the box is filled with snakes. Instead of helping them, the snakes spill out and fall all over Sing. Sing desperately tries to whistle them away, but they end up biting him directly on the lip. This leads to a wild chase, with the landlady pursuing Sing across the highway. Somehow, despite the chaos and injuries, Sing manages to escape from her. The following morning, Bone meets Sing again and is surprised to see that his wounds have already healed. He comments on how Sing always seems to recover unusually fast, no matter how badly he gets hurt. While walking together, they notice two blind men carrying a large bag and begin making fun of them. But these two men are not ordinary travelers. They are deadly kung fu masters hired by the Axe Gang. Brother Sum has brought them in to eliminate the 3 kung fu fighters hiding in Pigsty Alley. That night, the blind masters arrive at the colony. One of them immediately attacks and kills the coolie before anyone can react. The other goes after the tailor, and the two begin fighting. At first, the tailor manages to hold his own and even beats up one of the blind masters. But once the fight moves outside, he finds himself facing both enemies at the same time. The blind masters then use their musical instrument as a weapon, sending waves of deadly attacks and different kinds of blades toward him. The baker rushes in to help the tailor, joining the battle with all his strength. But even with both of them fighting together, they cannot overpower the blind assassins. Just as the tailor and baker are about to be struck by a final attack, the landlady stops it with her devastating scream. At that moment, the landlord suddenly appears between the two blind masters and destroys their instrument. He then begins fighting them directly, using their own attacks against them and beating them with effortless power. With his incredible strength, he throws the two men around as if they weigh nothing. But the blind masters quickly recover and repair their instrument, preparing to unleash their strongest attack on the landlord. Before they can finish him, the landlady steps in and releases a scream so powerful that both men are blasted away, their clothes torn apart by the force. Terrified and defeated, the blind masters beg for mercy and quickly run away. Afterward, the landlady confronts Brother Sum and warns him never to bother her again. Pigsty Alley then falls into grief as the residents mourn the deaths of the coolie and the tailor. The baker is the only one of the three who survives long enough to thank the landlord and landlady, saying he is honored to have witnessed their true power before dying. The couple then reveal why they had chosen to hide their abilities and live as ordinary people. Their only son had died because of kung fu, and after that tragedy, they wanted nothing more to do with the martial arts world. The barber from earlier asks them to train him, hoping he can learn kung fu as well. But the landlady refuses, explaining that mastering kung fu takes far too long unless someone is born with extraordinary natural talent. The barber tries to prove that he has what it takes, proudly showing off his so-called kung fu ability and insisting that he is the chosen one. But his confidence does not last long. The moment he steps forward, he is taken down with a single punch, making it painfully clear that he is nowhere near ready. The next day, Sing and Bone once again come across the ice cream girl Fong. This time, Sing approaches her with his usual tough guy attitude and threatens her for money. After robbing her, he and Bone are about to leave when Fong suddenly takes out a candy bar and shows it to him. Sing freezes for a moment. Fong cannot speak, but through her gestures, she makes it clear that she recognizes him. Sing slowly realizes the truth. She is the same little girl he once tried to protect from the bullies when they were children. That memory hits him harder than he expects. Instead of facing the emotions rising inside him, Sing throws the candy bar away and runs off. Overwhelmed and confused, he tells Bone to leave him alone. He gives Bone all the money they stole and tells him to go back to their village. But before Sing can get away, 2 Axe Gang members capture him. They take him back to Brother Sum, who decides to give him one final chance to earn a place in the gang. This time, the task is stranger and more dangerous than before. Sing is brought to a mental asylum, where the Axe Gang advisor gives him a map and instructs him to reach the final cell and release the man locked inside. Sing hurries through the asylum and reaches the heavily secured door. Even though warning signs everywhere clearly tell him not to open it, he ignores them and uses his lock-picking skills to slowly unlock the iron door. Inside the cell, he finds a quiet, middle-aged man known as the Beast. At first glance, the Beast looks completely ordinary and unimpressive, nothing like the terrifying legend everyone has been expecting. The Beast is then taken to the Axe Gang's headquarters, but the gang members struggle to believe that this plain-looking man could be a legendary killer. The advisor asks the Beast how much money he wants, but the Beast replies that he is not interested in payment. What he wants is a worthy opponent. Brother Sum still doubts him, so he orders his men to attack the Beast. The gang members beat him savagely, but the Beast absorbs every blow without reacting. Then he calmly takes a gun from one of the men and shoots at himself. Before the bullet can hit him, he catches it between 2 fingers. The entire room falls silent. Shocked and frightened by what they have just witnessed, the Axe Gang members immediately bow to him with respect. Without warning, the Beast walks toward a wall and smashes through it with a single kick, opening a path into the casino next door. There, The landlord and landlady from Pigsty Alley are waiting, ready to settle things with the Axe Gang once and for all. A fierce kung fu battle erupts almost immediately. The landlord and landlady attack with incredible skill, but the beast takes their strikes as if they barely affect him. No matter what they throw at him, he continues standing with terrifying ease. Soon, he begins to turn the fight around, beating both of them down. Even the landlady's powerful scream, which had defeated the blind assassins, fails to stop him. The beast simply withstands it like a true monster. The fight grows more intense, and it becomes clear that the beast is far stronger than anything they have faced. With no other option, the landlady breaks open the top of a funeral bell and screams through it. The bell amplifies her voice into a devastating shockwave, finally blasting the beast away and destroying the entire building around them. For a brief moment, the beast appears to accept their strength. He bows before them as if admitting defeat. But it is only a trick. He suddenly attacks with his hidden lotus pen and tries to shoot them. Then he stabs both the landlord and landlady and traps them in a painful lock. Seeing how dangerous the beast really is, Brother Sum orders Sing to hit him on the head with a wooden railing. But Sing makes an unexpected choice. Instead of attacking the couple, he turns and strikes Brother Sum first. Then he smashes the railing over the beast's head. The beast explodes with rage. He throws the landlord and landlady out of his hold and focuses all his anger on Sing. He beats him brutally, punching him again and again until Sing is completely broken. One final punch is so powerful that it drives Sing's face straight into the concrete floor. While the beast is distracted, the landlord and landlady manage to escape with Sing. Brother Sum becomes furious that the beast allowed them to get away and shouts at him. But the beast has no patience for him anymore. With one punch to the face, he kills Brother Sum instantly. Back at Pigsty Alley, the landlord and landlady desperately try to save Sing's life using Chinese medicine and acupuncture. His injuries are severe, but something about his body is unusual. The landlady is shocked to see how quickly he begins recovering. Outside the alley, the beast arrives with the entire Axe Gang, surrounding Pigsty Alley and preparing for the final confrontation. Sing eventually wakes up and helps the landlord and landlady settle down to rest. Without saying much, he calmly walks out of the room. Outside, the final battle begins. Sing faces the entire Axe Gang by himself. Even though he is heavily outnumbered, he moves with unbelievable speed and power, defeating the gang members one after another. As they watch, the landlord and landlady realize what has happened. The beast's brutal beating unlocked Sing's blocked chi flow and released the true potential that had been hidden inside him all along. After destroying the Axe Gang's forces, Sing calmly walks toward the beast and punches him straight out of the building. The two begin an incredible battle, and at first, it seems like they are evenly matched. But the beast soon reveals the full extent of his power. He activates the toad-style technique, becoming even more dangerous and physically overwhelming. With a single crushing strike, the beast sends Sing flying high into the sky, far above the clouds. But in that moment, Sing receives the blessing of Buddha and finally remembers the Buddhist palm technique from his childhood. He then falls back toward the earth with unstoppable force and unleashes the legendary move, smashing the beast deep into the ground. Before Sing can finish him, the beast surrenders. But even then, he tries one last trick, suddenly attacking Sing with a hidden stab. Sing responds with another overwhelming strike, and a massive palm-shaped hole appears in the wall beside the beast. Realizing he has truly been defeated, the beast finally gives up and accepts Sing as his master. Sometime later, Sing and Bone have left their criminal dreams behind and opened a candy shop in the city. One day, Fong appears outside the shop, and Sing immediately notices her. After everything that happened, the two finally reunite. The movie ends with the same kung fu book vendor approaching another young girl, once again trying to sell a martial arts manual and perhaps beginning a new story. There are some movies that don't really introduce themselves quietly. Kung Fu Hustle is one of those movies that basically kicks the door open, throws a guy across the room, makes a cartoon sound effect in your head, and somehow still expects you to care about the story underneath all of that madness. And weirdly, you do. This is Stephen Chow at his most chaotic, but also maybe his most confident. The movie is a martial arts comedy, sure, but that description almost feels too normal for what this thing actually is. Because Kung Fu Hustle is not just people fighting with jokes in between. It is more like a full-blown live-action cartoon pretending to be a kung fu gangster movie. You have sharp-dressed criminals swinging axes around like they walked out of some old crime film. You have a poor little neighborhood that looks completely helpless, until it turns out half the people living there could probably destroy an army before breakfast. You have slapstick, superhuman fighting, ridiculous sound effects, sudden bursts of violence, and then, every now and then, this little emotional beat sneaks in and reminds you that Stephen Chow is not just throwing nonsense at the screen. He knows exactly what kind of nonsense he is throwing. That is the fun of it. The movie is wild. Not slightly quirky wild. Proper wild. Proper wild. The kind where one scene feels like a classic kung fu showdown, the next feels like a Roadrunner cartoon, and then suddenly, the whole thing turns into some strange fantasy battle where the laws of physics have clearly given up and gone home. And honestly, that is either going to pull you in immediately, or it is going to make you ask, what am I watching? For me, that is part of the charm. Kung Fu Hustle does not beg to be taken seriously. It knows it is ridiculous. It knows the characters are exaggerated. It knows the action is impossible. But it commits so hard to its own madness that after a while, you stop questioning it and just go along for the ride. And that ride is loud, messy, funny, stylish, sometimes surprisingly sweet, and completely unlike a normal martial arts movie. So before getting into the story, the characters, the action, and the things that do not work quite as smoothly, I think the most important thing to understand is this. Kung Fu Hustle is not trying to be realistic. It is not trying to be subtle. It is not trying to be the most serious kung fu film ever made. It is trying to entertain you. And from the first few minutes, you can feel Stephen Chow doing everything he can to make sure the movie never sits still long enough to become ordinary. Now, it is kind of impossible to talk about IK Kung Fu Hustle without bringing up Shaolin Soccer. Not because every Stephen Chow movie needs to be compared to the last one, but because, let's be honest, for a lot of people outside Hong Kong cinema, Shaolin Soccer was probably the film that introduced them to his style in the first place. That was the movie where many viewers first realized, okay, this guy is not making normal comedies. And then See Kung Fu Hustle comes along and basically says, you thought that was strange? Fine, let's go even further. But here's the thing. Depending on what you loved about Shaolin Soccer, your reaction to Kung Fu Hustle might be very different. If you loved Shaolin Soccer because it had that underdog sports movie structure, that cleaner emotional rhythm, and a story that was easier to hold on to, then Kung Fu Hustle can feel a little messier. It does not move with the same simple, satisfying sports film momentum. It is stranger, more scattered, and at times it feels like the plot is just trying to keep up with whatever insane idea Stephen Chow wants to throw on screen next. And I can understand why some people prefer Shaolin Soccer for that reason. It has a clearer shape. You know where it is going. It has that team-building energy, that comeback feeling, that very familiar but enjoyable sports movie heartbeat. Kung Fu Hustle is not really like that. This one feels more like a fever dream built out of kung fu movies, gangster films, cartoons, and slapstick comedy. It is bigger in some ways, but also rougher. The jokes are louder. The action is more violent. The whole thing feels less like a neat story and more like a crazy machine that keeps adding new parts while it is already moving. And for some viewers, that is exactly why it is more exciting. Because where Shaolin Soccer was weird inside a very recognizable structure, Kung Fu Hustle feels like Stephen Chow fully letting the leash off. The movie is more chaotic, more visually wild, more aggressive with its comedy, and more willing to abandon realism completely. It is the kind of sequel in spirit where the filmmaker does not just repeat the old formula. He takes the energy people liked before and pushes it into something even more absurd. Now, personally, I do think Shaolin Soccer has the stronger story. It is tighter. It is easier to emotionally track. It has that very direct charm. But Kung Fu Hustle has a different kind of appeal. It is not trying to be as clean. It is trying to overwhelm you a little. And sometimes it does. There are moments where you can feel the movie almost running ahead of itself. The plot gets thinner, the jokes get broader, and the violence is definitely more intense than what someone might expect if they only came in because they liked Shaolin Soccer. So yes, if you went into this expecting the exact same flavor, I can see why it might throw you off. But at the same time, that is also what makes it interesting. Because Kung Fu Hustle is not just more Shaolin Soccer. It is Stephen Chow taking the same love of exaggerated physical comedy and pushing it into a darker, stranger, more chaotic martial arts world. It is less polished in some areas, but more daring in others. Less emotionally neat, but maybe more visually unforgettable. So the comparison is useful, but only up to a point. If Shaolin Soccer is Chow turning sports into a cartoon, then Kung Fu Hustle is him turning Kung Fu cinema into a full-blown comic book explosion. One is cleaner, the other is crazier. And depending on your taste, either one could easily be your favorite. So the basic setup of Kung Fu Hustle is actually pretty simple, even if the movie itself refuses to stay simple for more than 5 seconds. We're in this city where the Axe Gang basically controls everything. And they're not just regular criminals walking around quietly doing criminal stuff. No, these guys have style. They show up in sharp suits, carrying axes, moving like they know the whole street belongs to them. There's almost a musical quality to the way they enter a scene, like even their violence has been rehearsed. And then, on the other side of that, you have Pigsty Alley, which is maybe the least glamorous place imaginable. It's poor, crowded, noisy, dusty, and full of people who look like they're just trying to get through the day without someone causing trouble. It does not look heroic. It does not look special. It looks like the kind of place a gang would ignore because there's nothing worth taking. But of course, that is exactly the joke. Because Pigsty Alley is not weak. It is just hiding its strength under laundry lines, broken walls, bad tempers, cheap rooms, and people who seem completely ordinary until they are absolutely not. Then we meet Sing and Bone. And honestly, these two are not exactly criminal masterminds. Sing wants to join the Axe Gang, but he has none of the confidence or danger that would make him believable as a real gangster. He wants the image of being bad more than he actually seems built for it. He talks big, acts tough, and keeps trying to force himself into this villain role, but there is always something slightly pathetic about him. Bone, meanwhile, is just kind of there with him, following along like a loyal sidekick who may or may not fully understand the plan. He is not threatening. He is not clever. He is not even especially useful most of the time. But that is part of why the pair works comedically. They are two losers trying to step into a world that is far more dangerous than they can handle. Their mistake is pretending to be members of the Axe Gang in Pigsty Alley. At first, it feels like a dumb little scam. Just two small-time fools trying to scare poor people. But this being Kung Fu Hustle, one stupid decision immediately snowballs into complete chaos. Their fake gangster act attracts the attention of the real Axe Gang, and suddenly, this forgotten little neighborhood becomes the center of a much bigger conflict. And this is where the movie really starts having fun with expectations. Because when the Axe Gang arrives, you expect the residents of Pigsty Alley to be helpless. That is how this kind of setup usually works. The poor people are victims, the gangsters are monsters, and eventually some hero has to show up and protect everyone. But here, the heroes are already there. They're just not dressed like heroes. They are workers, tenants, landlords, everyday people. Some are rude, some are weird, some barely look awake. But hidden among them are martial arts masters with ridiculous levels of skill. And the reveal is genuinely satisfying because it flips the whole power dynamic of the movie. The Axe Gang thinks it has walked into an easy target, but really, it has walked into a trap without knowing it. That's the fun of the premise. It is not complicated, but it is instantly entertaining. A fake gangster brings real gangsters to a poor neighborhood. The poor neighborhood turns out to be full of secret kung fu legends, and the wannabe villain at the center of it all slowly gets pulled into a story much bigger than his own dumb ambition. From there, the movie keeps escalating. The gang sends stronger threats, the fights get stranger, assassins show up, the beast eventually enters the picture. And what started as a small con in a shabby alley turns into this full-blown war between criminals, hidden masters, and people who fight like the laws of physics were never explained to them properly. It is a ridiculous setup. But it works because it is clean enough to follow and loose enough to let Stephen Chow do whatever he wants with it. The plot gives him a playground, gangsters on one side, secret masters on the other, and Sing's stuck in the middle trying to figure out whether he is actually a bad guy or just a fool wearing the costume of one. And for a movie this wild, that is honestly all the foundation it needs. And honestly, once the movie gets to Pigsty Alley, that is where Kung Fu Hustle really starts to feel like itself. The Axe Gang stuff is fun, sure. The suits, the axes, the swagger, the whole exaggerated gangster image, it gives the movie a big opening punch. But Pigsty Alley is where the film gets its personality. That place is not just a location, it is basically the movie's bloodstream. At first glance, it looks like the kind of place nobody important would ever care about. It is cramped, dirty, loud, poor, and full of people who look like they are permanently annoyed by life. Nobody there looks heroic. Nobody looks graceful. Nobody looks like they are waiting for their big dramatic entrance. They look like people trying to survive rent, heat, noise, bad neighbors, and whatever nonsense the day throws at them. And that is what makes it work. Because the whole joke of Pigsty Alley is that it looks powerless from the outside, but underneath all that ordinary misery is this hidden world of strength. The residents do not introduce themselves like legends. They are not standing around in beautiful robes delivering mysterious speeches. They are workers, tenants, shopkeepers, landlords, loudmouths, weirdos. Half of them look like they would rather complain than fight, but then trouble shows up. And suddenly this poor little neighborhood turns into one of the most dangerous places in the city. That reveal is one of the film's best ideas. It flips the usual power fantasy around. Instead of giving us some polished hero walking in to save helpless poor people, the movie says, no, these people were never helpless in the first place. They just did not need to show anyone what they were capable of. There is something really satisfying about that. Pigsty Alley also gives the movie a kind of messy human energy that the larger gangster plot does not always have. The place feels alive because everyone there has attitude. People yell, they gossip, they get irritated. They move through the frame like they have known each other for years and are already sick of each other. Even before the kung fu starts, the neighborhood has this chaotic rhythm to it. It is not clean movie world poverty either. It feels sweaty, crowded, and uncomfortable. But Chow does not treat it like a tragic place. He treats it like a comic pressure cooker. Everyone is packed together, everyone is annoyed, and then violence walks in thinking it is in control. Big mistake. The best parts of the movie often happen when the action returns to this alley. There is a reason some viewers wish the film spent even more time there. The whole setting has such a strong identity that whenever the story leaves it for too long, you kind of feel the energy dip a little. Not because the other scenes are bad, but because Pigsty Alley is where all the odd pieces of the movie fit together most naturally. It is where the slapstick makes sense. It is where the hidden masters make sense. It is where the comedy, action, poverty, pride, and absurdity all collide without needing too much explanation. And visually, it is great because it is not glamorous. The dusty streets, the tight spaces, the worn-down buildings, all of that makes the sudden bursts of impossible martial arts even funnier. When someone starts flying through the air or unleashing some ridiculous hidden technique, it is happening in a place that looks completely unprepared for that level of madness. That contrast is the whole charm. Pigsty Alley is small, but it makes the movie feel bigger. It gives the story a center. Without it, Kung Fu Hustle might just be a collection of wild fight scenes and cartoon jokes. With it, the movie has a home base. A strange one, an ugly one, a loud one, but still a home base. And that matters because the film's heart is not really with the Axe Gang. It is not even completely with Sing at first. It is with this weird, poor, chaotic little neighborhood that everyone underestimates. That is why Pigsty Alley stays in your memory. Not because it is beautiful, not because it is heroic in the traditional sense, but because it is full of people who look ordinary until the exact moment they stop being ordinary. And in a movie built around surprise, that is pretty much the perfect place to begin. One of the reasons Kung Fu Hustle works as well as it does is that almost every character feels like they walked in from a different cartoon, a different Kung Fu legend, or maybe just a very strange neighborhood argument. And I mean that in a good way. This is not a movie filled with quiet, realistic people having carefully measured conversations. Nobody here feels normal for very long. Even the characters who look ordinary at first usually have something off about them. A weird rhythm, a sharp temper, a hidden skill, a strange way of standing in a room. Stephen Chow builds the movie out of personalities that are almost too big for the frame. Sing is the obvious center, but he is not the only reason the film stays entertaining. Actually, a lot of the fun comes from watching the side characters take over scenes before you even realize they have done it. Bone, for example, is not exactly complicated. He is basically Sing's loyal, clueless partner, the kind of guy who follows a terrible plan because thinking too much would probably only make things worse. But his deadpan stupidity works because he never feels like he is trying too hard to be funny. He is just there, getting dragged through chaos, looking confused, and somehow making Sing seem even more pathetic by comparison. Then there are the residents of Pigsty Alley. This is where the movie really starts stacking oddballs on top of oddballs. You have people who seem like background characters, workers, tenants, shopkeepers, loud neighbors, and then slowly, the movie starts revealing that some of them are basically hidden legends. That is such a fun idea because it turns the whole neighborhood into a mystery box. Anyone could be ridiculous. Anyone could be dangerous. Anyone could suddenly step forward and change the entire fight. And the film understands that surprise is more entertaining when the characters do not look like traditional heroes. These are not polished warriors standing around waiting for applause. They are messy, cranky, poor, tired-looking people. Some of them seem almost too ordinary to notice. But once they reveal what they can do, the movie gets this great little burst of energy, like it is saying, see? You judge them too early. The Axe Gang, on the other hand, is memorable in a completely different way. They are not just villains. They are a whole visual idea. The suits, the hats, the axes, the synchronized attitude. They feel like a criminal organization designed by someone who wanted gangsters to look both threatening and slightly ridiculous. And that fits the film perfectly. They are dangerous, yes, but they are also theatrical. You are never too far away from comedy, even when they are supposed to be intimidating. Then the movie brings in the assassins, and things get even stranger. The musical assassins are one of those ideas that sounds almost impossible to explain without making the movie sound insane. Which, to be fair, it is. But they add this eerie, fantasy-like quality to the film. They are not just fighters. They feel like a different kind of threat altogether. Quiet, stylish, weirdly elegant, and completely absurd once their power is revealed. And then, later, there is the Beast. The Beast is the kind of character a movie like this needs once it has already gone too far and still wants to go further. By the time he shows up, the film has already trained you to expect nonsense, but he still brings a different energy. He is not flashy in the same way as the Axe Gang. He is not comic in the same way as Bone. He has this strange, dangerous simplicity to him, like the movie is saying, okay, now here is the final problem. What is interesting is that many of these characters are not deeply developed, at least not in the usual dramatic sense. Some of them are thin, some are almost sketches. Some are built around one joke, one visual idea, or one fighting style. But somehow, that does not always hurt the movie. Because Kung Fu Hustle is not really asking every character to be psychologically complex. It wants them to be instantly readable, instantly entertaining, and visually memorable. It wants you to remember the way they move, the way they react, the way they suddenly reveal something impossible about themselves. And on that level, the cast does its job beautifully. The whole film feels like a collection of exaggerated human shapes. The wannabe gangster, the useless sidekick, the screaming landlady, the quiet master, the theatrical gang boss, the strange assassin, the impossible final opponent. They are not subtle characters, but they are alive in the movie's own language. That is the key. In a normal drama, this kind of character writing might feel too thin, but in Kung Fu Hustle, it feels like part of the design. The movie is operating like a live-action comic book, so the characters are drawn in bold lines. You understand them quickly, you recognize their role. And then Chow twists that role just enough to make them funny or surprising. That is why the ensemble matters so much. The movie would not work nearly as well if it only had Singh running around from one action scene to another. It needs the weirdness of the whole community. It needs Pigsty Alley's residents. It needs the Axe Gang's theatrical menace. It needs the assassins, the hidden masters, the sidekick, the landlords, and every strange little face that adds texture to the world. Because the real pleasure of Kung Fu Hustle is not just watching what happens next. It is watching who turns out to be more than they first appeared. But if we're talking about the characters who really walk away with the movie, we have to talk about the landlady and the landlord, especially the landlady. Because she is one of those characters who enters the film looking like a joke and then very quickly becomes the kind of person you would never want to offend in real life, in a movie, in a dream, anywhere. At first, she seems like the typical, loud, angry, impossible-to-please landlord figure. She is shouting at tenants, bossing people around, smoking like she has been disappointed by humanity for years, and generally treating everyone around her like they are one mistake away from being screamed into the ground. And the thing is, she is funny before she even starts fighting. Her whole presence is funny. The curlers, the cigarette, the posture, the dead-eyed impatience. She looks like she has absolutely no time for anyone's nonsense, which is perfect, because the entire movie is nonsense. She is basically standing in the middle of chaos, already exhausted by it. That is why the reveal of her actual ability works so well. The movie does not turn her into a graceful, elegant warrior. It keeps her personality intact. She is still rude, still irritated, still loud, still the kind of person who would rather yell first and explain never. But now all of that anger has a physical form. Her temper becomes a weapon, her voice becomes a weapon, her entire attitude becomes part of the action, and that is such a smart comic choice, because a lot of movies reveal a hidden master by suddenly making them calm, serious, and wise. Kung Fu Hustle does the opposite. It says, no, what if the hidden master is still exactly as unpleasant as she was before? What if her power does not soften her? What if it just makes her even more terrifying? That is where the comedy really lands. The landlord is quieter by comparison, but he works in a different way. He does not dominate the screen as aggressively as the landlady, but the contrast between them gives the movie a lot of its flavor. He looks harmless at first, almost forgettable next to her massive personality. But that is part of the trick. Like so many people in Pigsty Alley, he is far more capable than he appears. Together, they create one of the movie's best surprises. They do not look like action heroes. They do not carry themselves like the polished masters you expect from a serious martial arts film. They feel like two tired adults who have already lived a long, strange life and now just want people to stop causing problems in their building. And then, when danger pushes too far, the old skills come out. There is something very satisfying about that. It gives the action a different personality. These are not young heroes discovering their strength for the first time. These are older, crankier, stranger people who clearly have a past the movie only partly explains. You get the feeling that they have seen things. They have fought before, they have chosen to hide, and now they are being dragged back into a world they probably hoped to leave behind. But the film never gets too heavy with that idea. It hints at it, lets you feel it, and then throws another ridiculous gag at you before things can become too serious. That is the balance Chow keeps finding with them. The landlady and landlord are funny because they are exaggerated, but they are also cool because the movie allows them to be genuinely powerful. It does not reduce them to pure parody. When they fight, the action still has impact. When they reveal their abilities, the movie gives them real presence. You laugh, but you also understand that these two are not people the Axe Gang should have underestimated. And honestly, that is one of the best recurring pleasures of Kung Fu Hustle, watching arrogant people underestimate ridiculous-looking people. The Axe Gang sees a poor neighborhood. They see old residents, loud tenants, tired workers, strange little nobodies. They think they are walking into easy territory. But the landlady and landlord represent the film's whole philosophy. Power does not always look impressive from the outside. Sometimes it looks like a woman in curlers screaming at everyone. Sometimes it looks like a quiet husband standing beside her. And sometimes those are the last people you should mess with. That is why they steal so many scenes. They are not just funny side characters. They are the movie's attitude in human form. Rude, theatrical, surprising, violent, absurd, and somehow completely lovable in the strangest possible way. Now, Sing is a funny character because for a good chunk of the movie, he is not really someone you admire. He is not introduced as this noble underdog with a heart of gold shining through every scene. He is not instantly lovable. He is not even especially good at being bad. He is more like a guy who has convinced himself that becoming a villain is the easiest way to survive, except he is too awkward, too weak, and honestly too ridiculous to fully sell the act. And that is what makes him interesting. Sing wants to join the Axe Gang because, in his mind, being cruel looks powerful. Being feared looks easier than being decent. He has clearly decided that if the world rewards bad people, then maybe he should stop trying to be good and just become one of them. But the problem is, he does not have the soul for it. He can act tough for a few seconds maybe. He can threaten people badly. He can make stupid decisions. He can drag Bone into nonsense. But every time he tries to look dangerous, there is something slightly pathetic underneath it. You never fully believe he belongs with the real criminals, and I think the movie knows that. That gap between who Sing wants to be and who he actually is becomes the center of his arc. At first, he is chasing the image of power. He wants the respect, the fear, the status. He wants to be part of the Axe Gang because that seems like the winning side. But as the story goes on, it becomes clearer that Sing is not just a random fool trying to look cool. There is something damaged in him, something disappointed, something that once believed in goodness and then gave up on it. The movie does not explain all of this in a deeply dramatic way. It is not that kind of film. Sing's emotional development is broad, almost fairy tale simple, but there is still enough there to understand him. He is a person who tried to be good once, got hurt by the world, and decided that being bad might hurt less. That is a very simple idea, but it works. Because underneath all the cartoon madness, Kung Fu Hustle is partly about a man remembering his humanity. Sing spends much of the movie pretending he does not care, pretending he wants to belong to the villains, pretending he is beyond kindness. But the more chaos he causes, the more the story pushes him toward the truth. He is not meant to be one of them. He is not a gangster. He is a hero who has spent most of the movie wearing the wrong costume. Now, is that transformation perfectly developed? Not really. There are definitely moments where Sing's change feels sudden. The movie is so busy with action, jokes, hidden masters, assassins, and insane set pieces that his inner journey does not always get the breathing room it probably needs. You can feel the shape of his redemption arc, but you do not always feel every step of it. And yet, somehow, it still fits the movie. Because Kung Fu Hustle is not working with realistic psychology, it is working with myth, comedy, and destiny. Sing's arc is less about slow, careful character growth and more about a buried identity finally breaking through. Like the residents of Pigsty Alley, he is more than he appears. He just does not know it yet. That is why the idea of destiny matters here. The movie seems to suggest that Sing's path was always leading somewhere. His failures, his foolishness, his bad choices, even his attempts to become a villain. All of it eventually pushes him toward the person he was supposed to become. It is messy, yes, but in the logic of this film, messy is normal. Sing does not earn his hero moment in the quiet, realistic way a drama character might. He stumbles toward it. He gets humiliated toward it. He gets beaten, confused, exposed, and forced into it. And honestly, that feels right for him. Because Sing is not a graceful hero. He is not the calm master standing in the corner waiting for the perfect time to reveal himself. He is a clown who accidentally walks into his own destiny. That is what makes his final turn work better than it probably should. The movie has spent so much time making him look weak and foolish that when he finally steps into something greater, it feels less like a traditional heroic rise and more like the punchline to a very long joke, except the punchline has real emotion behind it. That balance is what keeps Sing from being just another silly lead character. He is funny because he fails so badly at being dangerous. But he matters because the film slowly reveals that his failure is not just incompetence, it is misdirection. He was aiming at the wrong life. The real story is not about whether Sing can join the Axe Gang. It is about whether he can stop trying to become someone he was never meant to be. And in a movie full of hidden masters, secret powers, and ordinary people revealing extraordinary strength, Sing's arc fits perfectly. He is another hidden identity waiting to be uncovered, another underestimated figure. Another person who looks like a joke until the moment the movie decides he is not. That is why his journey, even with its rough edges, gives Kung Fu Hustle something more than just noise. It gives the chaos a little bit of soul. For a movie this loud, this ridiculous, and this obsessed with throwing people through walls, Kung Fu Hustle has a softer side that sneaks up on you a little. It is not always front and center. Actually, for most of the movie, the emotional material is buried under jokes, fights, screaming, gang violence, cartoon physics, and Stephen Chow, just letting the whole thing run wild. But every now and then, the film slows down just enough to remind you that there is something underneath all the madness, and that something is mostly tied to Sing. The emotional thread around Sing's past is very simple, maybe too simple, depending on how much weight you want from this kind of story. There is a girl from his childhood, someone connected to a version of him that existed before he became this wannabe gangster clown. She represents innocence, regret, and the part of Sing that still knows the difference between being strong and just pretending to be cruel. Now, I will be honest, the movie does not give this subplot a huge amount of space. The girl herself is not developed much as a character. She is quiet, almost symbolic, and the film uses her more as an emotional memory than as a fully active person in the story. That can be frustrating because you can see what the movie is trying to do, but you also feel how thin that part is compared to the much louder, stranger characters around her. The landlady gets a whole personality just by standing in a doorway with a cigarette. The girl from Sing's past, meanwhile, is more like a feeling. But that feeling does matter, because without it, Sing's transformation would be much weaker. He cannot just go from pathetic wannabe criminal to unlikely hero because the plot needs him to. There has to be some sense that the goodness was always there, buried under disappointment and bad choices. The emotional subplot gives us that. It tells us that Sing was not always this way. At some point, he wanted to be better. At some point, he believed in doing the right thing. And then, life knocked that out of him. That is the quiet sadness underneath the comedy. Sing is funny because he fails so badly at being dangerous, but there is also something a little sad about watching someone try so hard to become worse than they are. He wants to look cruel because he thinks cruelty is power. He wants to join the Axe Gang because he thinks being feared is safer than being kind. The emotional subplot pushes against that. It reminds him, and us, that he is not naturally built for villainy. He is performing it, badly, but still performing it. And the more the movie moves forward, the more that performance starts to crack. What I like is that Kung Fu Hustle does not suddenly become a sentimental drama just because it has this emotional core. It does not stop the movie cold for long speeches about trauma or destiny. It gives you these small, almost awkward moments, and then it goes right back to the insanity. That might sound uneven, and sometimes it is, but it also feels weirdly fitting. Because Sing himself is uneven. He is ridiculous one minute, vulnerable the next, and then immediately ridiculous again. The movie's emotional rhythm kind of matches him. It does not polish him into a clean tragic hero. It lets him be messy. There are viewers who may feel the emotional subplot is undercooked, and I get that. It could have been stronger. It could have given the female character more agency. It could have made Sing's redemption feel less abrupt. The film clearly wants this thread to matter, but it does not always give it enough room to breathe. Still, even in that limited form, it adds warmth. And that warmth is important because Kung Fu Hustle could easily have become empty spectacle. A lot of movies with this much CGI, fighting, parody, and noise end up feeling hollow after a while. They entertain you scene by scene, but you do not feel anything underneath. Chow avoids that, at least partly, by giving Sing a small emotional wound and letting the story circle back to it. It is not deep exactly, but it is sincere, and sincerity matters in a movie this silly. It is the difference between watching random chaos and watching chaos with a little human shape inside it. The emotional subplot gives the film a reason to care about Sing beyond whether he survives the next joke or fight. It gives his final turn some meaning. Not a perfectly developed meaning, but enough. There is something oddly sweet about a movie that spends so much time being violent and absurd, then quietly suggests that the real battle is just a man remembering he is not as rotten as he tried to be. That is the hidden warmth of Kung Fu Hustle. It may be buried under slapstick, axes, musical assassins, impossible kung fu, and people getting smashed through concrete, but it is there. And when the movie reaches for it, even briefly, it gives the madness a little bit of heart. Now, this is probably where Kung Fu Hustle is going to lose some people. Because if we're being honest, the story is not exactly the strongest part of the movie. The premise is fun, the setup is clear enough. Wannabe gangster causes trouble. Real gangsters arrive, poor neighborhood turns out to be hiding kung fu masters, everything escalates from there. That part works. It gives the movie enough of a foundation to stand on. But once the film starts moving, the plot can feel like it is being held together with tape, luck, and Stephen Chow's confidence. And I do not even mean that as a complete insult. There are movies where a thin story feels like laziness, and then there are movies where the story is basically just a runway. Kung Fu Hustle is much closer to the second one. The plot is there so the movie has somewhere to launch its madness from. It is not really there to be studied too closely. Still, you do feel the looseness. Characters appear, shift, disappear, return, transform, and sometimes change emotional direction faster than the film can properly justify. Certain story beats feel rushed. Some scenes seem like they exist mainly because Chow had a great visual idea and needed somewhere to put it. And there are moments where you can almost feel the movie saying, "Don't worry too much about why this is happening. Just watch what happens next." For some viewers, that is fine. Actually, for a movie this wild, maybe it is even part of the appeal. The looseness gives the film room to breathe in its own weird way. It can go from gangster parody to slapstick chase to hidden master reveal to supernatural fight scene without stopping to explain every connection. The movie moves like a cartoon, so the story also behaves like one. But there is a downside. When the plot gets too thin, the emotional stakes can feel lighter than they should. Sing's journey matters, but the movie sometimes rushes past the smaller steps that would make his transformation hit harder. The residents of Pigsty Alley are memorable, but not always deeply explored. The villains are stylish, but often more like visual forces than fully developed threats. And again, that might be intentional. Kung Fu Hustle is not trying to be a slow character drama. It is not asking us to sit with moral complexity for 20 minutes. It is trying to entertain, surprise, and escalate. The story is more like a frame around a series of comic action paintings. Some of those paintings are incredible. Some are ridiculous. Some are both at the same time. But the frame itself? Pretty simple. Sometimes too simple. There are even moments where the movie feels slightly incoherent, especially when it jumps between tones. 1 second, it is pure slapstick. Then, it becomes violent. Then, suddenly, there is a dramatic emotional beat. Then, we are back to cartoon physics. The shifts can be funny, but they can also feel abrupt, like the movie is changing lanes without using an indicator. That roughness is probably why some viewers call the plot sloppy or hard to follow, even though the basic story is not complicated. It is not confusing because there are too many ideas. It is confusing because the movie keeps changing its rhythm. It is always chasing the next burst of energy. And when that energy works, you forgive a lot. You forgive the thin plotting because the action is inventive. You forgive the rushed character work because the characters are visually unforgettable. You forgive the messy structure because the comedy has momentum. You forgive the lack of depth because the film has personality. But if the humor does not land for you, or if the action feels too artificial, then the weak story becomes much harder to ignore. That is the tricky thing about a Kung Fu Hustle. Its strengths protect its weaknesses, but only if you are already enjoying the ride. If you are not, then all the little cracks become very obvious very quickly. Personally, I think the story is weak, but not fatal. It is more of a skeleton than a full body, but Stephen Chow dresses that skeleton in so much style, speed, noise, and imagination that you are rarely staring at the bones for too long. The movie is not tightly written in the traditional sense, but it is not empty either. There are setups. There are payoffs. There are emotional echoes. There are little details that come back later. So it is not random. It just feels chaotic by design, and maybe that is the best way to judge it. As a story, Kung Fu Hustle is thin. As an experience, it is packed. That difference matters, because if you only measure the movie by plot structure, it will probably seem underwritten. But if you measure it by rhythm, invention, comic timing, action escalation, and visual personality, then the thin plot becomes less of a deal breaker and more of the price you pay for everything else the movie is doing. Still, it is a real flaw. The movie could have been stronger with a cleaner narrative, smoother emotional progression, and a little more breathing room for Sing's development. It could have given the female character more presence. It could have made some transitions feel less sudden. It could have turned its already fun premise into something more satisfying dramatically. But then again, maybe a cleaner version of Kung Fu Hustle would also be a less interesting one. This film is messy because it is always reaching for the next absurd idea. Sometimes that hurts the story. Sometimes it creates the magic, and that is basically the trade-off. You do not come to Kung Fu Hustle for a perfectly constructed plot. You come for the madness built on top of it. One thing that really helps with Kung Fu Hustle is knowing what kind of movie you are walking into. Because if you go in expecting some serious martial arts drama about discipline, honor, tradition, inner peace, and the spiritual meaning of Kung Fu, yeah, this movie is probably going to slap that expectation out of your hand pretty quickly. This is not that kind of film. It is not trying to sit you down and explain the philosophy behind every punch. It is not trying to be graceful in the traditional martial arts movie sense. It is not especially interested in quiet wisdom or deep reflection. There are little touches of meaning, sure, and the film does have a heart under all the chaos. But the main goal here is very clear. It wants to entertain you. That's it. And honestly, there is something refreshing about how openly the movie commits to that. Kung Fu Hustle does not pretend to be deeper than it is. It does not keep pausing to convince you that every ridiculous fight scene has some grand hidden message. It knows it is a loud, weird, violent, cartoonish martial arts comedy, and it seems perfectly happy being exactly that. Sometimes that kind of honesty is underrated. There are plenty of action movies that desperately want to be taken seriously, even when the material is not strong enough to support that kind of weight. They add speeches, tragic backstories, dark lighting, moral dilemmas, and suddenly a simple genre film starts acting like it is carrying the fate of cinema on its shoulders. Kung Fu Hustles goes the other way. It says, what if we just made this fun? What if the gangsters looked cool but also ridiculous? What if the poor neighborhood was full of secret masters? What if violence worked like slapstick? What if a fight scene could suddenly become a cartoon chase, or a dance, or a fantasy sequence, or a joke that somehow still looks expensive? That is the spirit of the movie. It is pure diversion, but not lazy diversion. That distinction matters. The film may not be profound, but it is not careless. There is craft in the timing, the staging, the editing, the physical comedy, the escalation. Stephen Chow is clearly thinking about how to make each scene land, how to surprise the viewer, how to keep the energy moving. So when people say this is no thought required entertainment, I get what they mean. You do not need to sit there decoding symbolism or tracking complicated plot mechanics. You can simply watch the madness unfold. But at the same time, the movie itself is not brainless. A lot of skill goes into making something this silly feel this controlled. That is part of the charm. It is light entertainment with serious technique behind it. And yes, there is a small message running underneath everything. Sing's story is about a man who tries to become bad because he thinks goodness has no value. Pigsty Alley is about ordinary-looking people hiding extraordinary strength. The movie keeps returning to this idea that power does not always look like power, and that people are not always what they appear to be. But Chow never turns that into a lecture. He lets the meaning sit in the background while the foreground is busy throwing bodies through walls. That is probably the best way for this movie to handle its themes. If Kung Fu Hustle suddenly stopped being ridiculous and became deeply serious about its own message, it would feel false. The movie works because it keeps the emotion simple and lets the entertainment lead. And for some viewers, that simplicity may feel thin. Fair enough. If you want a kung fu film that leaves you thinking deeply about life, morality, violence, or spiritual growth, this may not be the one. If you want carefully developed philosophy wrapped inside martial arts discipline, Kung Fu Hustle is going to feel too goofy, too fast, too unserious. But if you want a film that understands the pleasure of cinema as movement, surprise, laughter, and spectacle, then it absolutely delivers. There is value in that too. Not every movie has to be heavy to be worth talking about. Sometimes a film earns its place by being energetic, inventive, and alive. Sometimes the joy is in watching a filmmaker use every tool available: camera speed, CGI, wirework, choreography, music, editing, performance, just to keep the audience smiling, laughing, or staring at the screen like, what did I just see? That is where Kung Fu Hustle shines. It is not a philosophical kung fu masterpiece. It is not trying to be. It is a crazy entertainment machine with just enough emotional warmth to keep it from feeling empty. And once you accept that, the movie becomes a lot easier to enjoy. You stop waiting for it to become serious, and you start appreciating how much effort it puts into being ridiculous. Because this film is not asking you to analyze every move, it is asking you to enjoy the ride. And honestly, when the ride is this wild, that is more than enough. The comedy in Kung Fu Hustle is not subtle. Let's just get that out of the way. This is not the kind of comedy where people quietly say clever things in beautifully written conversations, and you smile because the joke is hidden in the wording. No. This is the kind of comedy where someone gets thrown across the street, slammed into the ground, stretched beyond human possibility, and the movie basically dares you not to laugh. It is big comedy. Very big. Sometimes too big, depending on your taste. Stephen Chow is working in that old-school physical comedy tradition where the human body is basically a toy. People fall, bounce, twist, panic, sprint, scream, and survive things that should absolutely kill them. The movie treats pain like a punchline, but in that exaggerated cartoon way where nobody seems to exist under normal rules. And that is why the Looney Tunes comparison comes up so naturally. There are moments in Kung Fu Hustle that feel less like a traditional martial arts comedy, and more like a Roadrunner cartoon that somehow got trapped inside a gangster film. Characters run at impossible speeds. Their legs move faster than their brains. The timing is ridiculous. The reactions are even more ridiculous. And the laws of physics are clearly not invited to the set. There is also a bit of Tom and Jerry energy in there, where violence becomes this strange comic rhythm. Somebody gets hit, somebody crashes, somebody is flattened emotionally and physically, and the movie moves on like that is just how life works in this universe. It is childish, yes, but not always in a bad way. There is a difference between lazy childish humor and childish humor with timing, and Kung Fu Hustle usually understands that difference. A lot of the jokes work because Chow knows exactly when to stretch a gag and when to cut away. He lets some moments become absurdly long, then snaps into the next beat before they completely die. Other jokes are quick little visual hits, almost like comic panel punchlines. And because the whole movie is already exaggerated, the comedy does not feel separate from the action. That is important. The fights are funny. The chases are funny. The villain entrances are funny. Even the intimidating moments have a weird comic edge to them. The movie does not pause the story so it can tell a joke. The joke is usually built into how the scene moves. That is probably why the comedy feels so cartoonish. Everything is part of the same rhythm. The Axe Gang is funny because they are too stylish. Singh is funny because he is trying way too hard to look dangerous. Bone is funny because he barely seems to know what is happening. The landlady is funny because she is already furious before the scene has even started. And Pigsty Alley is funny because everyone there looks like they woke up annoyed and stayed that way. The film also has that manga and anime kind of exaggeration where emotions are not small. Fear is huge. Anger is huge. Embarrassment is huge. Pain is huge. Nobody just reacts normally. They explode into the reaction. And for a movie like this, that works. Because Kung Fu Hustle is not trying to convince you that these are real people living in a realistic world. It is trying to create a comic universe where everything is heightened. The faces, the movements, the sound effects, the fights, even the pauses. All of it is a little too much on purpose. But again, that is exactly where the divide comes in. If you enjoy broad physical comedy, this movie can be hilarious. If you like slapstick, cartoons, silent comedy, weird timing, and people being humiliated in extremely visual ways, there is a lot here to enjoy. The movie has a kind of reckless joy to it. It keeps reaching for the next gag, the next impossible reaction, the next stupid visual idea. But if that style does not work for you, it can become exhausting fast. Some jokes are very juvenile. Some bits feel like they are trying too hard. A few moments lean so far into silliness that you can almost feel the movie daring you to turn against it. And not every cultural reference or comic rhythm will land for every viewer. Comedy is already subjective, and this kind of comedy is even more subjective because it is so aggressive. There is no gentle middle ground here. You either start syncing with the movie's weird sense of humor, or you sit there thinking, why is everyone acting like this? And honestly, both reactions are understandable. The Sonic-like chase, for example, is exactly the kind of scene that explains the whole film. Some people will see it and laugh because it is so shamelessly stupid. Others will see it and think the movie has finally gone too far. It is a perfect test of whether you are on the film's wavelength. What I appreciate is that Chow never seems confused about the tone. He knows the comedy is ridiculous. He knows it is broad. He knows it is cartoonish. But he also stages it with enough energy and confidence that even when a joke does not fully land, the movie keeps moving. That momentum saves a lot. A slower version of this humor might be painful. But Kung Fu Hustle keeps its rhythm sharp. It throws a joke, then a fight, then a reveal, then another visual gag, then a sudden burst of violence, then something weirdly emotional, then another joke. You do not have much time to sit with the weaker bits because the next strange thing is already arriving. And that is probably the best way to describe the comedy overall. It is messy, loud, physical, childish, clever, stupid, inventive, and occasionally too much. Sometimes all in the same scene. But when it works, it really works. Because the humor is not just decoration. It is the movie's entire language. Kung Fu Hustle does not simply add jokes to a kung fu story. It turns kung fu into a joke, then somehow makes the joke look cool. It turns pain into choreography. It turns fear into body language. It turns action into slapstick without completely losing the excitement of the action. That is not easy. A lot of movies try to mix action and comedy, but one usually weakens the other. Either the jokes kill the danger, or the danger kills the jokes. Kung Fu Hustle avoids that by building a world where both things operate by the same cartoon logic. So yes, the comedy is not for everyone. It is broad, it is noisy, it is sometimes dumb in a very deliberate way. But it also has personality. And in a movie this strange, personality counts for a lot. Now, the thing with Kung Fu Hustle is that the humor is so specific, so loud, and so proudly ridiculous that I completely understand why it splits people. This is not one of those comedies where almost everyone can agree, yeah, that was pretty funny, even if they do not love it. No, this is more of a taste test movie. Within the first 20 or 30 minutes, you usually know whether you are on its wavelength or not, and if you are, it is a blast. If you are not, I can imagine it being very annoying. Because the comedy does not really have a quiet mode. It keeps pushing. A character gets hit, then the reaction gets bigger. Someone runs, then the running becomes impossible. A fight starts, then it turns into a cartoon. A villain tries to look scary, then the movie makes the whole thing absurd. It is constantly stretching reality for a joke, and depending on your mood, that can either feel fresh or exhausting. Some viewers love that. They see the movie as this wild, rewatchable piece of nonsense where the silliness is the whole point. The jokes are not always elegant, but they have energy. They have confidence. You can feel the film enjoying itself, and that kind of joy can be infectious. In a film full of loud, strange, unforgettable people, she feels oddly muted, and maybe that is intentional to some degree. But it still feels underwritten. Then there is the comedy, which is obviously going to depend on taste. When it works, it is hilarious. When it does not, it can feel very childish. Some jokes are broad to the point of being exhausting. A few gags feel like they are pushing for laughter through sheer stupidity rather than timing. And because the film is so committed to that cartoon style, if you are not laughing early, there is a good chance the movie will feel longer than it actually is. That is the danger of a comedy this loud. It does not have much of a backup mode. The action can also become too much. I know that sounds strange because the action is one of the main reasons to watch the movie, but there are moments where the escalation starts to feel relentless. Every fight has to be bigger, every ability has to be stranger, every impact has to be more impossible. For a while, that is thrilling. After a certain point, it can become tiring. Especially near the end, the CGI starts to take over a little. Now, the cartoonish effects mostly fit the tone. I do not think the film needed realistic effects to work. Actually, if everything looked too grounded, it might lose part of its charm. But there is still a point where the digital spectacle becomes so heavy that the physical comedy loses some of its texture. You start noticing the effect more than the movement. And for martial arts fans who prefer real physical technique, that can be disappointing. The movie is also not always smooth with tone. It jumps from slapstick to violence to drama to parody to fantasy very quickly. Most of the time, that chaos is exciting. But occasionally, the shifts feel awkward. A serious beat may arrive before the film has prepared enough emotional space for it. A brutal moment may be followed by a gag so quickly that it feels jarring. A joke may interrupt the scene that almost needed a little more weight. That unevenness is part of the experience, but it is still unevenness. There is also the issue of repetition. The film has so much action, so many gags, so many exaggerated reactions, that some viewers may feel worn down. If every scene is trying to be wild, then after a while, wild becomes normal. The movie mostly avoids that by constantly changing the flavor of the madness, but it does not avoid it completely. And that is where the style over substance criticism becomes understandable. Because yes, Kung Fu Hustle is absolutely more interested in movement, rhythm, comedy, action, and visual invention than deep storytelling. For many viewers, that is fine. For others, it may feel hollow. The movie has heart, but not always depth. It has emotion, but not always development. It has characters you remember, but not always characters you fully know. So I would not call the film flawless, not even close. It is too messy for that, too thin in places, too dependent on whether the viewer enjoys Stephen Chow's specific comic rhythm, too willing to let spectacle do the work that stronger writing could have done. But here's the thing, most of these flaws do not destroy the movie. They define the trade-off. A tighter Kung Fu Hustle might have had a stronger story, but maybe it would have lost some of that reckless energy. A more emotionally developed version might have landed harder, but maybe it would not move with the same insane speed. A more realistic action style might satisfy martial arts purists, but it would not feel like this strange live-action cartoon. So the question is not really, does the movie have flaws? It does. The real question is, do those flaws matter enough to ruin the experience? For me, no. They are noticeable, they are worth mentioning. but they are surrounded by so much invention, so much personality, and so much weird comic confidence that I can live with them. Os Kung Fu Hustle may not be clean, but it is alive, and sometimes a messy film with a real pulse is more exciting than a polished film with no personality at all. What is interesting about Kung Fu Hustle is that it is not the kind of movie everyone is going to meet in the middle. Some films get a very balanced reaction. People say, yeah, it was decent, or I liked parts of it, or it was fine. That is not really the energy here. Kung Fu Hustle is too weird for that. Too loud, too specific, too committed to its own strange little universe. You either start vibing with it, or you start pushing back against it. And honestly, I understand both reactions. For the people who love it, the film feels like a burst of pure imagination. It is fast, funny, stylish, violent, absurd, and packed with scenes that do not really look like anything else. There is always something happening. A gag, a fight, a reveal, a weird character, a visual reference, a sudden shift in tone. If you are on the movie's wavelength, that energy is addictive. It becomes the kind of film where the mess is part of the pleasure. You are not sitting there asking for perfect structure. You are waiting to see what impossible thing happens next. You are enjoying the fact that the movie does not behave. It keeps breaking its own limits, and for the right viewer, that feels exciting. That is why some people talk about it like a masterpiece of action comedy. Not because the plot is flawless or every joke lands, but because the overall experience feels so alive. It has that rare quality where you can feel a filmmaker's personality in almost every frame. Even the stupid parts feel intentional. Even the messy parts feel like they belong to the same wild imagination. But then there is the other side. For some viewers, that same energy is exactly the problem. The comedy is too broad, the characters are too cartoonish, the story is too thin, the action is too fake, the CGI is too obvious. The violence is too much, the tone jumps around too quickly. The whole thing can feel like a film that is constantly shouting, "Look how crazy this is," until the craziness stops being surprising. And if you feel that way, I get it. Because Kung Fu Hustle does not ease you into its style gently. It basically throws you into the deep end and expects you to swim. If you do not like cartoon physics, exaggerated slapstick, wire-fu, sudden violence, and characters who behave like live-action comic drawings, there is not much here to soften the experience for you. The movie is not trying to win over skeptics one quiet scene at a time. It is too busy sprinting into the next absurd set piece. That is why I think calling it an acquired taste is fair. Not in a dismissive way, but in an honest way. You have to accept the rules of this movie before you can really enjoy it. You have to accept that realism is gone. You have to accept that serious moments may be interrupted by ridiculous jokes. You have to accept that a fight scene can be both a dramatic confrontation and a cartoon gag. You have to accept that emotional development may be broad, while visual invention gets most of the attention. If you cannot accept that, the film probably will not work. But if you can, there is a lot to love. The thing is, Kung Fu Hustle is not confused about what it is. That matters. Some uneven movies feel frustrating because they are trying to be 5 different things and failing to decide. This one is trying to be 5 different things too, but somehow it knows that contradiction is part of its identity. It wants to be a gangster movie, a kung fu fantasy, a slapstick cartoon, a parody, a redemption story, and a visual effects showcase all at once. That is a ridiculous ambition. But it is also the reason people remember it. A safer version of this movie would probably be easier to recommend to everyone. It might have a cleaner story, softer humor, less violent action, smoother character development, and maybe it would be more balanced. But it would also lose the thing that makes Kung Fu Hustle feel so distinct. This film is memorable because it does too much. Too much comedy, too much action, too much CGI, too many references, too much violence, too much cartoon logic, too much everything. And somehow, for the right viewer, that too much becomes the charm. That is why the reception is so split. One person sees a messy, childish, overhyped action comedy. Another sees one of the most inventive martial arts comedies ever made. One person finds the humor stupid. Another cannot stop laughing. One person thinks the fights look fake. Another sees them as visual poetry. One person gets exhausted. Another gets energized. Same movie, completely different experience. And that is not always a bad thing. Sometimes divisive films are divisive because they are unclear or poorly made. But sometimes they are divisive because they have such a strong personality that they naturally push some viewers away. First, Kung Fu Hustle feels like the second kind. Its flaws are real, but its identity is also real. It is not bland, it is not timid, it does not feel like it was sanded down to please everyone. It is Stephen Chow's madness, fully committed. So if someone tells me they hated it, I would not argue too hard. I can see exactly why it would not work for them. But if someone tells me they love it, I understand that too. Because when this movie clicks, it really clicks. It turns all that noise into rhythm. It turns all that stupidity into style. It turns all that chaos into something strangely joyful. That is the best way to approach it. Not as a movie that needs to satisfy every kind of viewer, but as a movie that knows its audience will either climb aboard or jump off early. And if you do climb aboard, Kung Fu Hustle gives you one of the strangest rides in modern martial arts comedy. So after all the chaos, all the screaming, all the flying bodies, all the cartoon violence, all the hidden masters, and all the ridiculous Stephen Chow madness, where does Kung Fu Hustle actually land? For me, it lands as one of those movies that is very easy to criticize but very hard to forget. And that is usually a good sign. It is not flawless. I do not think it even tries to be flawless in the clean, polished, perfectly balanced sense. The story is thin. Some character work is rushed. The emotional subplot could have used more space. The female lead is more of an idea than a person. The comedy can be childish. The CGI sometimes gets too loud. And by the end, the movie is pushing so hard to top itself that you can feel the exhaustion creeping in a little. But even with all of that, the film has something a lot of cleaner movies do not have. Personality. A lot of personality. Kung Fu Hustle is alive in every scene. Even when a joke does not land, the movie is moving. Even when the plot feels weak, the visuals are doing something. Even when the action becomes absurd beyond belief, there is still a sense of invention behind it. You can feel Stephen Chow reaching for the next strange idea, the next visual gag, the next impossible fight, the next ridiculous surprise. That kind of energy counts for a lot, because this is not a film that feels manufactured to fit neatly into one category. It is not just a kung fu movie. It is not just a comedy. It is not just a parody. It is not just a gangster story. It is all of those things mashed together into something messy, fast, loud, and weirdly lovable. And maybe that is why it has lasted. It has images you remember. The Axe Gang moving like a stylish criminal dance troupe. Pigsty Alley hiding legends behind ordinary faces. The landlady standing there with her curlers and cigarette, somehow funnier and more intimidating than half the serious action heroes out there. The musical assassins turning violence into something eerie and elegant. Sing stumbling through the story like a fool who has no idea he is walking toward destiny. These are not small pleasures. They are the kind of moments that stick. And even if the story around them is not always strong, the moments themselves have such flavor that the movie keeps its grip on you. That is the strange strength of Kung Fu Hustle. It does not win you over by being perfectly written. It wins you over by being impossible to confuse with anything else. There is also something refreshing about how little shame the movie has. It knows it is ridiculous. It knows the fights are impossible. It knows the comedy is broad. It knows the characters are exaggerated. And instead of apologizing for that, it doubles down. It builds an entire world where nonsense makes sense, where violence can become slapstick, where kung fu can become magic, and where a poor, ugly little alley can turn into the center of an epic battle. That confidence is infectious. Not for everyone, obviously. If someone watches this and says it is too silly, too fake, too messy, too much, I get it. That is a completely fair reaction. This is an acquired taste. You have to be willing to accept the film's cartoon logic before you can really enjoy what it is doing. But if you do accept it, there is a lot here. There is genuine craft behind the stupidity. The camera timing, the editing, the choreography, the music, the visual rhythm, all of it is sharper than the surface silliness might suggest. That is what separates Kung Fu Hustle from a random, goofy action comedy. It may look like madness, but it is not lazy madness. It is controlled madness, mostly. And that mostly is important, because the movie does sometimes lose control. A few scenes go too far. Some jokes stretch past their limit. Some effects feel too artificial. Some emotional beats arrive without enough setup. But even when the film stumbles, it stumbles forward. It never becomes dull. It never becomes bland. It never feels like Chow is simply coasting. For a movie this chaotic, That is impressive. So no, Kung Fu Hustle is not the deepest martial arts movie ever made. It is not the most emotionally complete. It is not the most realistic. It is not the most disciplined. But it is one of the most entertaining examples of what can happen when a filmmaker takes genre seriously enough to understand it and unseriously enough to completely destroy it for laughs. That combination is special. It is a parody that loves Kung Fu. It is a comedy that still wants its fights to look amazing. It is a cartoon made with real actors. It is a gangster movie where the real power is hiding in a poor neighborhood full of people everyone underestimates. It is a redemption story buried under slapstick and special effects. And somehow, all of that works more often than it should. That is my final feeling on Kung Fu Hustle. It is messy but memorable, silly but skillful, thin but bursting with imagination, flawed but full of life. And sometimes, that is enough. More than enough, actually. Because long after you forget the exact plot details, you remember the feeling of watching it. That strange mix of laughter, disbelief, action, nonsense, and style. You remember how unpredictable it felt. You remember how much fun the movie seemed to be having with itself. And honestly, that is a big part of cinema too. Not every film has to leave you with a heavy message or a perfectly shaped story. Some films earn their place by giving you an experience you cannot get anywhere else. Kung Fu Hustle does that. It gives you a wild, stylish, absurd martial arts comedy that turns kung fu into cartoon poetry and somehow finds a little heart inside the madness. And for me, that makes it absolutely worth watching.